I never thought the day would come when my own brother would pin my arms down while his wife shoved a pen against my trembling fingers. The papers spread across the table weren't just words and ink. They were my entire life, my sanctuary, the walls that held every memory of my parents' laughter and my childhood tears. "Sign it, Wendy," Clara hissed, her voice sharp as a blade, her eyes gleaming with the coldness of someone who knew no boundaries. David's grip on my shoulder tightened, his knuckles white, his breath hot with anger. I tried to twist free, but their strength, their unity against me was suffocating. I could taste iron as blood trickled from my split lip, the result of David's shove only minutes earlier. "You're going to regret this if you don't," he warned, and for the first time in years, I realized just how far he had fallen into the darkness Clara fed him. The house around me seemed to hold its breath, the creak of its wooden beams echoing like a witness too afraid to intervene. Every corner of these rooms was carved into my soul, the worn staircase where I had once sat after school, hugging my knees while Mom comforted me, the kitchen where Dad used to make pancakes on Sundays, leaving behind the smell of butter and maple syrup. They were gone now, both of them, but their presence clung to this place like sunlight filtered through dusty windows. Clara's manicured hand slapped the paper again, demanding my signature as though she could erase decades of love and sweat poured into every brick. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking voice. "This house isn't yours to take," I whispered, but my defiance only made them laugh, as if they were certain I was too weak to fight back. Clara leaned closer, her perfume thick and suffocating, masking the stench of her greed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're alone, Wendy. No one's going to come save you." Her words cut deeper than David's fists because they carried a truth I hated to admit. I had let myself drift apart from friends, from neighbors, from anyone who might stand by me. For years, I believed family was the unshakable foundation I could cling to, even when storms raged. Now that very foundation had cracked, leaving me balanced on nothing but betrayal. David's face was a mask I barely recognized, twisted with desperation, veins straining in his neck. He wasn't my brother in this moment. He was Clara's puppet, acting on her greed, drowning his own conscience in her approval. My mind fled backward as if searching for refuge. I remembered the day I first stepped into this house after my parents passed. Boxes stacked high, the silence heavy but comforting. I had promised myself I would keep it alive, that their dreams wouldn't die with them. I worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, patched the roof myself when it leaked, painted the walls until my arms burned. Every nail I hammered carried a piece of my determination. This wasn't just a house. It was my testament, my proof that even after losing everything, I could rebuild, I could stand. Now, staring into Clara's narrowed eyes, I felt like a child again, cornered, powerless, stripped of everything but the pulse of defiance still beating inside me. David pushed the pen harder against my fingers, his voice low but urgent. "It's just a signature, Wendy. Stop being dramatic." Dramatic? My laugh came out sharp and bitter, tears blurring my vision. They had no idea what they were asking me to give up. No idea of the nights I spent curled on the living room floor, crying into silence and praying for strength to keep going. To them, it was just property. Bricks, land, money. To me, it was flesh and bone, stitched together with memories of my parents who sacrificed everything so I could stand here today. And now their son, their golden child, wanted to rip it from me with the same hands they once trusted to protect me. The pen wobbled in my grip as my hand shook violently, but I refused to move it across the page. Clara's eyes flashed with fury, and she grabbed my chin so tightly that her nails dug into my skin. "Sign it, or I'll make sure you lose more than just this house," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. The threat wasn't vague. I knew she meant it. The room spun as David pressed down harder, his weight crushing my willpower. And yet, deep beneath the fear clawing at my chest, something stubborn rose, a spark my parents had always nurtured in me. I wasn't going to hand them my life, not like this, not ever. I remembered my father's voice, rough yet gentle, telling me once, "A house isn't just shelter, Wendy. It's where your soul learns to breathe." Those words had carried me through grief, loneliness, and exhaustion. Now, they wrapped around me like armor. Clara thought intimidation could strip me of everything, but she didn't know the truth carved into the very foundation of these walls. She didn't know what my father had left behind, what my Aunt Eleanor had once whispered to me when the paperwork was finalized. Even I hadn't fully understood it back then, But in this moment of desperation, the memory flickered like a secret flame. The laughter of my brother and his wife filled the room, cruel and hollow, echoing against the walls I loved. But I didn't beg, didn't crumble the way they expected. Instead, I lifted my swollen face, blood dripping from my lip, and smiled. It wasn't madness, it was defiance, the kind born from truth I hadn't spoken yet. Clara's grip faltered, David's brows furrowed in confusion. "What are you smiling at?" Clara snapped, her voice shrill, her mask of power cracking just enough for me to see the fear beneath. My voice was hoarse, but steady as stone when I finally whispered the words that made them freeze. This house was never mine to sign away. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, and electrified with their disbelief. I felt their hands loosen slightly, their certainty slipping for the first time since this nightmare began. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat screaming that the game had shifted. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was beaten. But they were about to learn the truth that would shatter their illusions, a truth hidden in plain sight, one they never suspected. And as I stared into their stunned faces, I knew this war for my home was only beginning. I can still see it as if it were yesterday. The chipped wooden fence in our backyard, the smell of Mom's roses blooming in spring, and David racing across the grass with Dad cheering him on. He was always faster, taller, louder, and somehow brighter in their eyes. I was the shadow trailing behind, the little sister who clapped for his victories, even when no one clapped for me. At birthday parties, David got the biggest slice of cake. At school events, Mom ironed his shirts crisp and perfect, while mine were folded with hurried hands. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was loved too, but a quiet ache grew each time I saw their faces light up for him in ways they never did for me. It was as though I was standing in the same house, but on the other side of a glass wall, watching warmth, but never truly touching it. There were moments when David would flash me a smile, when we'd sit together on the porch eating popsicles in the summer, and I'd almost believe we were equals. But those moments never lasted. He learned early that he could bend rules, charm his way out of punishment, and take credit for things he didn't do. When I pointed it out, I became the jealous sister, the complainer. I remember one night, I found the vase Mom loved shattered in the living room. David had been playing ball inside, and when Mom rushed in, her eyes immediately landed on me. I tried to protest, but David's trembling lips and wide, innocent eyes silenced everything. "She did it," he whispered, and Mom believed him. I cried myself to sleep that night, not just because of the unfairness, but because I realized David had discovered a power I would never have. That power only grew as we got older. Teachers adored him. Neighbors called him such a good boy, and Dad bragged about his sports trophies at work. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who stayed home to help Mom cook, the one who studied late into the night without anyone noticing. My accomplishments, though modest, were mine, but in the household, they faded under the glow of David's golden boy image. Sometimes I wondered if he even realized how much space he took up, or if he liked watching me shrink into the corners so he could shine brighter. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. He was still my brother. And when Dad hugged him tightly at graduation while giving me only a pat on the shoulder, I told myself it wasn't David's fault. But deep down, resentment began to coil like smoke in my chest. It was around that time Clara appeared, a dazzling smile, sharp eyes, and a presence that filled the room like she had always belonged there. David met her at a college party, and from the moment he introduced her to our family, she played her role flawlessly. Mom loved her elegance, Dad admired her wit, and David was enchanted. Clara knew exactly what words to say, what gestures to make, and she wrapped herself around his arm like a snake disguised as silk. I watched her closely, unease pricking at me. Something in the way her eyes lingered too long on possessions, on our home, on my parents' jewelry, told me she wasn't here just for David. But whenever I voiced concern, I was brushed aside. "You're jealous," David scoffed. "Not everyone's out to get you." And maybe I wanted to believe him. Maybe I wanted to believe she truly loved him. But Clara had a way of isolating. Slowly, subtly, she began to edge me out of conversations, changing topics when I walked into the room, whispering things into David's ear that made him glare at me. I remember once during a family dinner, Mom praised the lasagna I had made. Clara's smile was quick and cutting. "David told me you copied the recipe from me, didn't you, Wendy?" Her tone was light, playful, but the look in her eyes was sharp as glass. I opened my mouth to argue, but David laughed. brushing my protest aside, and the moment was lost. That's how she worked. Little comments, little jabs, painting me as petty, insecure, bitter, and it worked. Soon my parents began to roll their eyes when I tried to speak against her. Clara was winning a war no one knew had even begun. David's transformation under Clara's influence was slow, but terrifying. My once playful brother became sharper, colder, quicker to anger when it came to me. He stopped asking me to join him on errands or games. Instead, he clung to Clara's side, as though she were his compass, his anchor. I saw in her the same manipulative streak David had once wielded against me as children, but magnified, polished, and dangerous. And David, hungry for validation, was her perfect victim. What unsettled me most wasn't just losing him, but realizing Clara saw me as an obstacle, not family. She knew the bond I had with this house, with my parents' memory, and I could feel her quiet determination to sever it. Even then, I sensed she had plans bigger than I could imagine. I tried to hold on to scraps of connection. When Dad passed away suddenly from a heart attack, I reached for David, hoping grief would remind us of our shared roots. For one brief evening, as we sat on the porch in silence, I saw the brother I knew, his hands shaking, tears staining his face. But then Clara placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear, and his eyes hardened again. From that day forward, he seemed further away, his grief redirected into anger at me for reasons I couldn't understand. Clara had twisted the narrative, painted me as selfish, as someone clinging to things that weren't mine. And David, blinded by grief and her poison, believed her. By the time Mom passed a few years later, the gap between us was a canyon. I tried, God knows I tried, to keep us close, to remind him of what family meant. But Clara's voice was louder, more persuasive. She filled his ears with promises of new beginnings, investments, and the idea that the house was nothing more than a burden Wendy clings to because she has nothing else. Those words burned into me, because I knew they were hers, not his. My brother had become the echo of a woman who saw our family legacy as a prize, a stepping stone in her climb for power. And standing at Mom's funeral, with Clara's hand firmly clutching David's, I felt the storm brewing, the one that would eventually bring us to the table where I bled, trembling, refusing to sign away the only piece of my parents I had left. What I didn't know then was that Clara's influence wasn't only about David's heart. It was about control, about power that reached far beyond what I could see. Every manipulation, every word she planted was part of a plan she had been building for years. And as much as I hated her then, I hadn't yet realized how ruthless she truly was. I hadn't yet realized that one day she would stand in my kitchen with my blood on her hands, demanding my signature, convinced she had already won. But I carried something she didn't expect, a truth buried in this house, a truth that would eventually turn her confidence into fear. The house became more than walls and memories after Mom passed. It became my sanctuary. I remember walking through its dusty halls, sunlight filtering through curtains that hadn't been touched in months, and feeling both the weight of loss and the call to rebuild. It wasn't easy. The pipes leaked, the roof moaned when it rained, and the garden had become wild with weeds. But for me, every broken tile, every creaking floorboard was an invitation. I rolled up my sleeves, put on gloves, and set out to breathe life back into what my parents had left behind. In every stroke of paint, in every nail hammered, I felt like I was repairing myself, piece by piece. It wasn't just about restoring a house. It was about reclaiming a legacy, one I wasn't ready to let rot. At first, I could barely afford it. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, waitressing late nights, filing papers at a law office during the day, tutoring kids on weekends. My body ached, and there were nights I collapsed onto the bare floor, too tired to even climb into bed. But I refused to give up. Slowly, the house responded. I remember the first time I flipped a switch, and the lights worked in every room. I stood there in the middle of the living room, laughing like a child, tears streaming down my cheeks. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, capable, unshaken. That house wasn't draining me. It was giving me strength. Every victory, no matter how small, reminded me that I could stand on my own. Of course, David and Clara noticed. At first, Clara made comments disguised as compliments. "It's cute, Wendy," she'd say with that sharp smile. "You're trying so hard to play homemaker." Her tone dripped with condescension, but I bit my tongue. David, meanwhile, questioned why I was wasting my money and energy on an old pile of wood. He didn't understand that this wasn't just real estate to me. It was roots. And though he never admitted it, I saw the flicker of envy in his eyes when neighbors praised my work, when friends admired the improvements. For once, the attention was on me, not him, and Clara didn't like it. I could feel her calculating, her gaze darting around the house whenever she visited, as though measuring what it could be worth in her hands. The more I thrived, the more their resentment showed. When I got promoted at work and celebrated by planting a new rosebush in Mom's garden, David laughed bitterly. "You're still living in a fantasy, Wendy. That house is a tomb." I wanted to scream, to remind him it was the same house he grew up in, the same one where we had played hide-and-seek as children. But Clara was always there, whispering in his ear, fanning the flames. "She's clinging because she has nothing else," Clara said once, not realizing I overheard. Her words cut deep, but they also fueled me. I wasn't clinging. I was building. Small conflicts started to escalate. One afternoon, David showed up unannounced, barging into the house like he owned it. He criticized the furniture I had chosen, the color of the walls, even the books I stacked in the study. Clara stood beside him, her arms crossed, smirking as though daring me to challenge them. When I asked them to leave, David's face darkened. "You don't get to tell me to leave my own home," he snapped. My chest tightened. The house was legally mine, yet his words revealed something deeper. He still believed in some twisted way that everything of ours belonged more to him than to me. Clara's approving smile told me she had planted that belief herself. As the years passed, I built more than a home. I built stability. I earned enough to travel occasionally, to treat myself to things Mom once told me I deserved but never had. Friends began to see me as someone strong, not the overlooked sister. I even started teaching workshops at the community center, helping young women learn budgeting and independence. It was liberating to stand tall, to no longer be defined by David's shadow. Yet with every step forward I took, Clara tightened her hold on him. I could see the bitterness in their eyes during family gatherings. They resented that I had carved out a life without them, that I had something they couldn't control. And though I smiled politely, I always left those gatherings with a knot of dread in my stomach. Then came the day Clara made her first real move. She cornered me in the kitchen during David's birthday party, her perfume sharp, her voice soft enough for only me to hear. "You're wasting your youth in this house," she said, leaning close. "One day, you'll realize it belongs in better hands." Her words slithered into me like venom. I wanted to push her away, to scream that the house was mine, but instead I just stared at her. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just jealousy. Clara had plans, and those plans involved taking what was mine, no matter the cost. The air between us thickened after that. Every visit, every phone call was laced with tension. David grew more aggressive, less like a brother and more like a stranger. Clara's remarks became sharper, her eyes hungrier. I fortified myself with the house, pouring love into its walls, because I sensed one day it would be tested, but I underestimated how far they would go. I thought they'd argue, maybe push legal battles, maybe even try to shame me. I didn't realize they would cross into violence, into threats, into something that would leave me trembling at my own dining room table years later. Looking back, every insult, every sneer, every confrontation was just the prelude to the storm they were preparing to unleash. The first real confrontation came on a humid afternoon in late summer, when cicadas buzzed so loudly in the trees that their song felt like a warning. David and Clara showed up without calling, walking straight through the front door as though they had every right. I was in the kitchen kneading bread, my hands covered in flour, when Clara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "We need to talk about this house," she said, her tone sharp, decisive. David stood behind her, arms folded, his eyes a mirror of hers, cold, expectant. I knew instantly that whatever this was, it wasn't casual. Something in their stance told me they'd rehearsed it. Clara didn't waste time. "You don't deserve this place, Wendy," she said flatly, her gaze sweeping over the walls I had painted, the furniture I had chosen, the photos I'd carefully hung. "You live here like a child playing at being an adult, but this house isn't yours to keep. It's wasted on you." My chest tightened as I wiped my hands on a towel, trying to steady my voice. David shifted uncomfortably, but when he opened his mouth, the words that came out weren't his. They were Clara's. "She's right. This house is too much for you. You can't handle the responsibility. You should sign it over to us." His voice lacked conviction, yet it carried the weight of betrayal. Hearing David repeat her words was like being stabbed in the back. He was my brother, the boy who once held my hand during thunderstorms, who shared whispered secrets in the dark. Now he stood beside her, parroting her script, his loyalty swallowed whole. I wanted to scream at him, to remind him of the nights we hid in this house when Dad's temper flared, the times we both clung to Mom's embrace in this very kitchen. But those memories meant nothing to him anymore. Clara had replaced them with her narrative, that I was unworthy, that I was clinging to something that belonged to us all. Yet deep down, I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, as though part of him knew he was betraying me. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my heart thundered. This house is mine, David. Legally, morally, emotionally, it's mine. I've poured years into it. Everything I've earned. Every ounce of strength I have. How dare you say I don't deserve it? My words echoed louder than I intended, bouncing off the walls, the house itself seeming to side with me. Clara's lips curled into a smile, sharp as glass. Deserve? She repeated, mocking me. What you deserve, Wendy, is a smaller life. Something easier. Something you can handle. You're not built for this. You think your little paint jobs and flower beds make you strong, but this house is bigger than you. It needs someone like me. Her arrogance made my blood boil, but I bit my tongue, knowing that rage would only feed her. David stepped closer, his voice rising, though I could hear the tremor beneath it. She's right. Stop acting like you're better than us. You were always the weak one, Wendy. Always the one Mom had to protect. Do you think living here makes you a hero? His words gutted me, not because they were true, but because they were his. I had spent my whole life loving him despite everything, the favoritism, the dismissiveness, the selfishness. And yet, standing there, I realized that loving him might mean losing everything. My loyalty to him had always been unshakable, but in that moment, I saw clearly that his loyalty to me had a price tag. And Clara was the one holding the pen. I turned my back to them, partly because I couldn't stand their faces, partly because I needed the strength of the house itself to ground me. My hands brushed over the counter I had sanded myself, the cabinets I had repainted late into the night when exhaustion nearly broke me. This house wasn't just a structure. It was my witness. Every corner carried my sweat, my tears, my laughter. I couldn't let them take it. You're not taking this from me, I said finally, my voice breaking but resolute. I don't care what you think I deserve. This house is mine, and I will fight for it. My body trembled, but I stood tall. Clara's eyes narrowed, her smile fading into something colder, more dangerous. For the first time, I saw the sharp edge of her ambition fully exposed. We'll see about that, she said softly, her words slithering like smoke. You might think you're strong now, but strength is tested in fire. And I don't think you'll survive what's coming. She turned to leave, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. David lingered for a second, his eyes meeting mine, searching, perhaps for forgiveness. But I had none to give. He followed her out, the door slamming behind them, leaving me in silence so heavy it crushed my chest. When they were gone, I collapsed into the chair by the window, my breath shaking, my hands still dusted with flour. Tears blurred my vision, but anger burned hotter beneath them. For the first time, I saw Clara for what she truly was, not just manipulative, not just ambitious, but dangerous. And David was lost to me, at least for now. As I sat there, staring at the garden I had brought back to life, I made myself a promise. I would not surrender, not to them, not to their greed, not even to the brother I once loved more than myself. This house was more than a home. It was a battlefield, and the war had just begun. The days after that confrontation blurred into a haze of unease, as though the walls of my house no longer offered protection, but listened silently, waiting for the next attack. At first it was little things, anonymous phone calls in the night where no one spoke, only heavy breathing, footsteps crunching on the gravel outside at odd hours, long after the town had gone quiet. Once, I found the front gate unlatched, though I knew I had locked it. My gut screamed that it was Clara's doing, her way of creeping into my mind, sowing fear. It wasn't just about intimidation. It was about breaking me from the inside, piece by piece. And though I tried to stay calm, my heart lived in my throat. Clara had a talent for cruelty that didn't need to be loud. She began spreading whispers in town, weaving lies into the fabric of my relationships. I overheard neighbors hinting that I was unstable, that the stress of maintaining the house was unraveling me. At the grocery store, someone mentioned hearing that I was in debt, A story so absurd I laughed, until I saw Clara's car parked outside. Her face tilted with amusement as she watched me squirm. She didn't just want the house. She wanted to strip me of dignity, so that when I finally broke, no one would believe my side of the story. David, meanwhile, became Clara's blunt instrument. He showed up often, his temper shorter than I had ever seen. "Why are you making this so hard?" he shouted once, pounding his fist against the wooden railing on the porch I had rebuilt with my own hands. "You're alone, Wendy. Don't you get it? You don't have anyone to help you. Clara and I could take care of this place better than you ever could. Stop fighting us." His desperation bled through his anger, as though he had convinced himself this was an act of mercy. But his words only deepened the chasm between us. Inside, I was unraveling. Nights were the worst. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house magnified, every shadow lengthened into menace. I thought of calling friends, but Clara's rumors had worked their poison well. Conversations were shorter, smiles more hesitant. Offers to visit came less frequently. Isolation crept in quietly, until even the sound of my own breathing felt oppressive. I had fought loneliness before, but this was different. This was engineered, manufactured, a cage Clara built with precision, tightening around me. One evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, no name, just my own written in thick, jagged strokes. Inside was a single piece of paper with 5 words: "Sign it over, or else." My hands shook as I held it. The ink smeared as my sweat seeped into the fibers. I didn't need to ask who had sent it. The message was clear, and the threat didn't need details to be effective. For the first time, the thought that Clara might escalate beyond manipulation to actual violence rooted itself in my mind, and once that seed was planted, it grew quickly, feeding off my fear. David, for all his weakness, wasn't blind. I saw the conflict flash in his eyes during one of his visits, when he noticed how exhausted I looked. For a moment, his hand hovered as though he might reach out, might remember that we were siblings bound by more than Clara's greed. But then Clara's voice cut in, sharp and commanding, and his arm fell back to his side. He chose her, again and again, each choice cutting away the last fragile ties that held us together. Watching him shrink under her control was almost worse than facing her cruelty directly. Clara thrived on my visible suffering. When she passed me in town, she would lean close enough for only me to hear. "Tick-tock, Wendy. Houses can burn, you know." Her breath was cold on my ear, her tone casual, as though she were talking about the weather. People around us smiled politely, oblivious to the venom dripping from her words. That was her genius. Torment delivered in doses too small for anyone else to notice, but large enough to poison me slowly. I walked away from those encounters trembling, her laughter echoing behind me like a haunting melody. By the end of that week, I barely recognized myself. The once vibrant woman who poured her heart into every corner of her home was shrinking, doubting, retreating. Yet somewhere beneath the layers of fear, a spark remained. Clara wanted me broken, desperate enough to hand her the house out of sheer exhaustion, but I couldn't let her win. Each threat, each lie, each moment of terror was proof of how much she feared my strength. I didn't know how I would fight her yet, or even if I had the tools to do it alone, but I knew this: surrender was not an option. The storm finally broke one evening when I heard a pounding on my front door, so forceful that the frame rattled and dust fell from the ceiling. I froze, clutching the phone in my hand, torn between calling for help and praying the noise would stop. But the door burst open before I could move, and there stood David, his face red with fury, his chest heaving as though he had run the whole way. Clara slithered in behind him, her lips curled into a triumphant smirk. I backed away instinctively, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. The air in the house seemed to thicken, pressing against me, making escape impossible. David lunged forward, grabbing my arm with a grip that sent fire shooting through my muscles. "Enough of this," he growled, dragging me toward the table where a stack of papers lay neatly arranged, no doubt placed there by Clara beforehand. His touch was not the brotherly hand I once knew. It was brutal, desperate, the grip of someone who had surrendered his conscience. I cried out, begging him to let me go, but his fingers only dug deeper into my skin. Clara's eyes glinted, her delight in my suffering shining like polished glass in the dim light. "Sign it, Wendy," Clara hissed, sliding the pen across the table toward me. "Do it now, and stop this ridiculous charade. You've wasted enough of our time." Her voice was sharp, like shards of glass, each word cutting deeper than the last. She shoved the papers forward until the edge scraped against my wrist, leaving a red mark. My tears blurred the ink, and I could barely see the words, but I knew exactly what they were. The deed, my home, my history, my sanctuary being stolen in front of me. David pushed me into the chair, holding my shoulders down as though I were nothing more than a rebellious child. His breath was hot against my ear, filled with frustration and shame. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he muttered, though his trembling hands betrayed the weight of what he was doing. I struggled against him, my arms straining, but he was stronger. My heart pounded violently, every beat reminding me that I was alone, trapped between the cruelty of one and the weakness of another. Pain bloomed across my body as David forced the pen into my hand, his grip tightening around my fingers until my knuckles cracked. "Sign," Clara barked, slamming her palm against the table, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. I felt the tip of the pen scratch against the paper as he pressed my hand down, the ink threatening to spill a future I refused to accept. In that moment, fear consumed me so completely I thought I might faint. But deep beneath the terror, a spark of defiance still burned, faint but unyielding. "I won't give you what you want," I spat through clenched teeth, my voice shaking but firm. My lips were swollen, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth where David had struck me earlier. Yet I forced the words out. Clara's face twisted in rage, the mask of control she wore so carefully beginning to crack. She leaned down until her eyes bore into mine, venom dripping from her whisper. "Then you won't walk away from this house at all." For the first time, I saw not just greed, but hatred, the kind that could consume a person completely. David's grip faltered, if only for a second, when my words cut through the fog of violence. His eyes flickered with something, shame, perhaps, or doubt, but Clara's nails dug into his shoulder, anchoring him back to her will. "Do it, David," she barked, her tone sharp with command. "Don't let her ruin everything we've worked for." He tightened his hold again, pressing me harder against the table, as if crushing me would silence my resistance. In that moment, I realized my brother was gone, swallowed whole by Clara's ambition. But even as pain coursed through me, even as fear wrapped its claws around my chest, I refused to break. This house was more than walls and windows. It was my parents' laughter, their sacrifices, my own blood and sweat poured into every corner. Signing those papers would be erasing myself, allowing them to bury me alive. And so, through tears and trembling limbs, I lifted my head and met Clara's furious gaze with something she didn't expect. A smile, small, defiant, but undeniable. She recoiled, if only for a heartbeat, as though realizing that no matter how much she tried to crush me, my spirit was not so easily conquered. When the door finally slammed shut behind them that night, I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling from exhaustion and bruises. My arms bore the marks of David's grip, dark shapes blooming like cruel signatures of betrayal. My lips still bled, the metallic taste refusing to fade. The silence in the house was suffocating, every creak of the wooden beams echoing their cruelty. And yet, beneath the fear that clawed at my ribs, something else began to stir. Resolve. They believed they had broken me, but what they didn't know was that their violence had sharpened me instead. I dragged myself up, forcing my body to move despite the pain, and went straight to the drawer where I kept old documents. My hands shook as I pulled out folder after folder, my vision blurring with tears. I remembered Eleanor's voice, steady, calm, almost prophetic, telling me once, "Never put all your trust in appearances, Wendy. The truth is rarely where people expect it to be." At the time, I thought she was speaking of people and motives, but now those words echoed with a different weight. Perhaps she had meant something far more literal. Years ago, after the funeral, when I was organizing the endless piles of paperwork left behind, I had stumbled across a strange detail. The deed to the house had not been filed under my name. I assumed it was a clerical mistake and tucked the thought away, too tired to unravel more mysteries in the haze of grief. But now, as I flipped through the brittle pages of faded ink, the memory grew sharper. My heart began to race with the possibility that the truth was deeper than even Clara could imagine. If the house wasn't in my name, then whose was it? The question churned inside me, both terrifying and electrifying. I remembered the elegant handwriting on one of the documents. Not mine, not David's. It bore the signature of someone I hadn't thought much of since Eleanor, my aunt, my mother's sister, the quiet shadow who always stayed in the background at family gatherings. She had loved this house too, had walked its halls with reverence, had spoken about preserving what mattered. Could it be that she was the true guardian of this place? I sat at the table, bruised and aching, but my mind alive in a way it hadn't been in days. Clara believed me cornered. David believed me weak, but they were wrong. What they didn't know was that their arrogance had blinded them. They had assumed everything was as it appeared. Me, the sole owner, vulnerable, and without allies. But Eleanor's words were proof that there was more, that I had overlooked a secret waiting to rise when I needed it most. And now, that moment had come. The thought of Eleanor filled me with a bittersweet ache. She had passed away years ago, but her presence lingered in the corners of this house. I remembered her hands, always firm yet gentle, folding mine around a cup of tea as she whispered stories of resilience and dignity. She had warned me, subtly but deliberately, about people like Clara, people who feed on weakness, who prey on those who hesitate. I wondered if Eleanor had foreseen this very battle, if she had intentionally left behind safeguards I was only now uncovering. I spread the papers across the table, tracing the faded ink with my fingers, searching for confirmation. My heart thudded with each line I read, with each signature that wasn't mine. The further I looked, the clearer it became. Eleanor's name appeared again and again, tied legally to the deed in ways that left no room for doubt. The house had never belonged to me. I was only its keeper, its caretaker, its beating heart. But Eleanor, even from beyond the grave, was its shield. A laugh escaped me, ragged and broken, but filled with something neither David nor Clara could extinguish. Triumph. They thought I was defenseless, trapped in their game of power and greed. But what they didn't realize was that they had been aiming their arrows at the wrong target all along. This house, this sanctuary of my family's memory, was bound to Eleanor, and through her, it was untouchable. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe freely, the beginnings of a plan taking shape. They had played their hand. Now, it was time for me to play mine. The night they dragged me into the dining room will never leave me. The storm outside battered the windows, but nothing compared to the chaos inside these walls. David shoved me down into the chair so hard my spine jolted, pain radiating down to my ribs. Clara's nails dug into my shoulder as she slammed the stack of papers on the table, her voice shrill with rage. "Sign it, Wendy! Enough of this charade!" she barked, her eyes glinting with venom. My heart hammered, my breath shallow, but even as fear strangled me, I could feel something deep inside me hardening. This was the moment, the one Eleanor had prepared me for without ever saying it outright. David towered over me, his face twisted with something feral, nothing like the brother I once adored. His fists pounded the table, rattling the glass, making me flinch each time. "Do it now! Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he shouted, veins bulging at his temples. His strength pinned me in place, his hands gripping my wrists so tightly I thought the bones might crack. I cried out, tears streaming down my cheeks, not just from the pain but from the sheer heartbreak of realizing how far he had fallen. He was no longer my brother. He was Clara's puppet, her weapon, her shield of muscle and blind loyalty. Clara leaned close, her perfume sickly sweet as it mixed with the iron tang of blood from my split lip. "Think about it," she whispered, her voice low, serpentine. "All this fighting, all this pain, it can stop. One signature, and you'll be free. Isn't your freedom worth a house you never deserved?" Her words were sharp, designed to pierce me where I was weakest. But she didn't understand. The house wasn't just wood and stone. It was my mother's laughter, my father's wisdom, Eleanor's protection, and every ounce of independence I had fought for. Giving it away would be erasing myself. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head despite the throbbing in my skull from where David had shoved me earlier. Clara's expression twisted, her patience fraying. She shoved the pen into my hand, curling my trembling fingers around it while David forced the paper flat against the table. "Sign!" they barked in unison, like executioners demanding obedience. My hand shook so violently the ink smeared across the line, my tears dripping onto the page until the words blurred into pools of anguish. My lip quivered as sobs broke from me, my body broken, my spirit bruised, and yet I resisted, every heartbeat screaming that I couldn't give them what they wanted. David's weight pressed harder, forcing my arm down until the pen scratched the surface. My body screamed in protest, and in that instant, I tasted the edge of despair. Clara's laughter sliced through the air, cruel and triumphant, as she leaned back to watch me fall apart. I felt the hot sting of blood trickling down my chin, my chest heaving with ragged breaths. But somewhere inside that storm of pain, a flicker of clarity ignited. It was now or never. Either I surrendered everything, or I showed them a truth they were unprepared to hear. I lifted my head, meeting Clara's eyes through the blur of tears. My voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. "It's not mine to sign." For a second, the world seemed to stop. Clara's smirk faltered. David froze mid-grip, and the storm outside thundered as if punctuating the revelation. My words hung heavy in the air, echoing with a force none of us could deny. My tears still fell, but behind them, something stronger gleamed. Defiance. Clara's face contorted with disbelief, then fury. "What are you talking about? Don't play games with me, Wendy," she snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. David's grip loosened, confusion flickering across his face as though a part of him still wanted to understand. "Not yours," he muttered, the first crack of doubt slipping into his voice. Clara slapped the table, her knuckles white as she hissed. "Lies. She's stalling. She thinks she's clever." But I saw it in her eyes. Fear. For the first time, Clara's certainty had wavered. I pulled my wrist free with what little strength I had left, the pen clattering to the floor. My body shook, every inch of me aching, but my spirit surged. "You think you've cornered me?" I rasped, my voice steadier now. "But you've been fighting shadows. This house, it doesn't belong to me. You've been threatening, beating, and bleeding me for something I could never give you." My chest heaved, but I forced a trembling smile, a flash of triumph beneath the ruin they had tried to make of me. For the first time, the balance shifted, and I knew, deep down, the war was no longer theirs to win. The morning sunlight had barely begun to spill through the curtains when a knock at the door made me freeze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Clara and David had left in a flurry of muttered threats, sure of their victory, and I had spent the night patching my bruises and trembling with exhaustion. But the knock was insistent, echoing through the quiet house like a drumbeat of fate. My pulse quickened, dread and hope mingling in equal measure. I opened the door slowly, and there she stood, Eleanor, my aunt, long thought gone, standing as if no time had touched her, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of generations. Her presence was electrifying, a sudden gust of clarity in a world clouded by lies. Clara and David hadn't anticipated this, and neither had I, though a part of me had always hoped. Eleanor's gaze swept over the room, calm and authoritative, and she said nothing at first. The air seemed to vibrate with expectation, the tension between past and present thickening. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat, a mixture of relief and terror at seeing the woman who had always been the secret guardian of my family's legacy. Then she spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "Wendy, show them the papers." I obeyed, trembling, holding out the folders Eleanor had come to retrieve. Her eyes were steady, almost clinical, as she took them and began to flip through each page. David and Clara, who had thought themselves untouchable, exchanged uncertain glances. What is this?" Clara stammered, her voice sharp with panic, while David's confidence crumbled in his throat. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence build, letting the weight of anticipation press down on everyone present. Finally, Eleanor looked directly at them, her tone imbued with quiet authority. "These documents prove what you refuse to see. The house never belonged to Wendy. It was, and always has been, under my name. The deed is here, legally binding, and it cannot be challenged by threats, intimidation, or violence." My hands shook as she laid the papers on the table, pointing to the official seals and signatures that authenticated her claim. Clara's face went pale, the confident mask she had worn for so long cracking like glass under pressure. David's face mirrored disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as if words might somehow change reality. "No, this can't be. Wendy, why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, almost pleading, his voice trembling. Clara, however, could not hide her fury. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but Eleanor's hand stopped her mid-motion. "You will not touch these. Not now. Not ever," she said, calm, yet deadly. The audacity of her authority left Clara frozen, and for the first time, the air in the room shifted. Fear replaced greed, and arrogance crumbled under the weight of truth. I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication, as Eleanor's gaze met mine. She had not only vindicated me, but had also delivered a lesson to those who sought to exploit weakness for their own gain. Clara's lips trembled as she realized that her entire scheme, every lie and manipulation, was worthless against the law and the memory of integrity Eleanor had preserved. David, still in shock, sank into a chair, unable to reconcile the brother he thought he was with the one standing before him. The emotional fallout was immediate and overwhelming. Clara's eyes filled with tears, though they were not of remorse. They were the first signs of fear, the recognition that she had underestimated the power of truth and the consequences of her actions. David's head hung low, shame and regret washing over him in waves. I stood in the center of the room, bruised but triumphant, as the weight of weeks of fear and tension lifted just enough to let me breathe. Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me in the reality of what had just unfolded. By the time the room settled into uneasy silence, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Clara and David, once so sure of their dominance, now faced the consequences of their greed and violence. I realized, with a mixture of sorrow and relief, that our family would never be the same. But the house, my sanctuary, my inheritance, the symbol of resilience and love, was finally safe. Eleanor gave me a small, knowing smile, and in that moment, I understood that some victories are measured not by the battles we fight, but by the truths we reveal when the stakes are highest. The air in the house felt different that morning, heavy with tension, but tinged with a rare sense of clarity. Clara had fled hours earlier, leaving David slumped in the corner, his face pale, his body still shaking from the revelation Eleanor had delivered. I walked slowly toward him, my steps measured, each one echoing the weight of years of pain and betrayal. My bruises still throbbed, a constant reminder of how close I had come to losing everything, but they also reminded me of the strength I had found within myself. This was my moment, the moment to finally confront the man who had once been my brother, who had once been my protector, and demand the truth of his choices. David raised his head when he sensed me standing before him, but the defiance in his eyes had crumbled entirely. "Wendy, he began, his voice breaking, uncertain. I held up a hand, stopping him before the words could tumble into excuses. "Save it," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I don't need apologies. I need you to understand the choices you've made. Every time you let her manipulate you, every time you turned your back on me, you made a decision. And now you see the consequence." My words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of overlooked loyalty and silent suffering. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, his gaze fell to the floor, shame overtaking him completely. I thought I was protecting you," he whispered, but even he knew it was a lie. Clara had always been the one guiding his actions, twisting his sense of duty into something unrecognizable. I took a slow step closer, my eyes locking onto his, unflinching. "Protecting me?" I repeated, my voice echoing in the room. "You beat me. You bullied me. You sided with her while I was bleeding on this floor, and you call that protection?" Each word was deliberate, each sentence a reckoning, a mirror reflecting back every act of cruelty they had tried to disguise as concern. Eleanor, standing quietly behind me, gave a subtle nod, her presence grounding me. She had always known that the house, and the family's legacy, was never just about ownership. It was about integrity, about recognizing strength in the right places, and about teaching those who sought to harm us that truth cannot be stolen. I reached out and placed a hand on Eleanor's, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. I was no longer the cornered, trembling girl who had been forced to the edge of despair. I was Wendy, a woman who had reclaimed her home, her voice, and her dignity. David's shoulders slumped, and tears streamed down his face as he finally confronted the reality he had been avoiding. "I was wrong," he murmured, his voice a mixture of fear and regret. "I should have seen her for who she was. I should have protected you." I let him speak, letting the weight of his guilt settle between us, but I didn't soften my stance. "It's too late for excuses," I replied. "What matters now is what you do with the truth, and whether you can rebuild anything after the damage has been done." My words were firm, not cruel, because there was nothing left to gain from anger. Only clarity, only justice. Clara's absence was palpable, her threats and manipulations reduced to empty echoes that could no longer harm me. I knew she would face consequences, legal and social, and that knowledge brought a strange calm. The storm she had created in my life had been powerful, but it was finite, and it had passed. The house, which had been a symbol of vulnerability and a target for greed, was now a sanctuary again, a place where truth and resilience held sway, and where those who tried to dominate through fear had no power. I felt Eleanor squeeze my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of all the battles fought and won. As I looked around the room, at the furniture my family had left behind, and the sunlight streaming through the windows, I realized that this victory was more than legal or material. It was emotional, spiritual, and moral. I had faced betrayal, intimidation, and physical violence, yet I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. I thought about the years spent caring for this house, preserving its memory, and honoring those who had built it. I thought about my parents, about Eleanor, and about the version of myself who had once trembled in fear, but had now stood tall in truth. The last thing I did before stepping outside was turn back to David, who still sat in stunned silence. "Learn from this," I said quietly. "Life will test you, and family can betray, but truth and courage will always prevail. Never forget that." His head nodded slightly, a silent promise to reflect, though whether he would act on it remained uncertain. I felt no malice, only the quiet triumph of someone who had endured and emerged victorious. The house belonged to Eleanor and me now, a shield and a home united by love, legacy, and resilience. I stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp air, and felt the weight of fear and doubt lift completely. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without trembling. Eleanor joined me, her presence warm and steady, and together we looked at the house bathed in morning light. I knew the battles weren't over. Life never allows such finality, but the lesson was clear. Strength is not about avoiding pain. It is about confronting it, reclaiming power, and letting truth shine even when others try to drown it in lies. And with that, I felt a profound sense of peace, a bond renewed with Eleanor, and the knowledge that no one could ever take this home, or my integrity, from me again.